Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hey there, it's Molly, and welcome back to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. Think Thursdays are all about our beautiful, brilliant human brains. We're talking neuroscience and mindset and some just practical things to help us keep our brains healthy. Today, I want to talk to you about something that probably we don't think about often enough, and that is about subtraction. Now, I promise you this isn't going to be a math lesson. I actually want you to think about this. Have you ever noticed that when something in your life isn't working, your instinct is to add something? You add a new habit, you add a new system, you add a new goal, you download another app, and maybe you layer on even one more strategy. We are remarkably creative when it comes to piling things on, but we are far less inclined to take things away. And that actually isn't random. That is neurological. Today, I want to explore why the human brain is biased toward addition, why subtraction can feel uncomfortable, sometimes even threatening, and why learning to remove instead of pile on may be one of the most intelligent behavior change strategies you can practice. Because sometimes the most sophisticated move is simplifying. There's some fascinating research from Dr. Leidy Klotz at the University of Virginia that illustrates this really beautifully. Participants were given design challenges, structures that needed improvement or stabilization, and they were using things that looked a little bit like Legos, right? And they were simply asked to make them better. Overwhelmingly, people added elements. They added blocks. They added supports. They added components. Even when removing a single piece would have solved the problem faster and more effectively, people were prone to adding things. Even when they were explicitly told that subtraction was allowed, and even when they were incentivized to find the most efficient solution, they still defaulted to adding things. And that's the part that's worth pausing on. This isn't laziness. It isn't lack of intelligence. It isn't personality. It is cognitive wiring. Your brain equates improvement with accumulation. If something isn't working, it must need more. And why do adding things on, changing things in terms of adding more in feel so right to us? First, adding feels active. It feels productive. There's visible effort involved, and effort is something that we've been trained to value. You can point to what you've added and say, look what I'm doing. Subtraction feels quieter. It feels like absence. And our brains are surprisingly uncomfortable with absence. From an evolutionary perspective, accumulating resources increased survival odds. More tools, more food, more allies meant greater security. So the brain developed a bias towards acquisition. You fast forward to modern life, and that same primitive brain, that ancient wiring, shows up everywhere. If I'm tired, I add a supplement. If I'm distracted, I add a productivity hack. If I'm overwhelmed, I add a new planning system. More must be better. Except it often isn't. There's another layer here that deepens this bias. Psychologically, we experience loss more intensely than gain. It's called loss aversion. The discomfort of losing something is stronger than the pleasure of gaining something equal. So when we remove something, even something that isn't serving us anymore, the brain can register that as a threat, not logically, but emotionally, which is why clearing your calendar can feel uncomfortable, even if you're exhausted. It's why deleting social media apps can feel strange, even if they're draining you. And it's why simplifying can initially feel like you're missing out. Your brain doesn't immediately categorize subtraction as refinement. It categorizes it as a loss. And then we layer culture on top of that wiring, right? We live in a society that constantly reinforces the idea that more equals success. More followers, more income, more productivity, more experiences, more upgrades. Even our language reflects it. We talk about leveling up, scaling up, building more, doing more, becoming more. And we rarely talk about editing. We rarely celebrate removing. We almost never frame simplification as advancement. From an early age, achievement often means adding credentials. Career growth means adding responsibility. Fitness improvement means adding intensity. And personal development means adding tools. Heck, I talk about a lot of them here on the podcast. So when something feels off in our lives, our nervous system just doesn't default to addition because of evolution. It defaults to addition because we've been trained, conditioned, and everything else bombarded with it from the get-go to equate accumulation with progress. And the subtle consequence of that conditioning is this: if we're not adding, we start to believe that we're falling behind. But biologically, constant expansion increases load. And neurologically, increased load reduces flexibility. So the very strategy we've been trained to trust, add more, can quietly make change harder. Your prefrontal cortex, that beautiful, logical, most human part of your brain that I talk about all the time, the part that's responsible for planning and impulse control, long-term decision making, it has limited capacity. It's powerful, but it's not endless. And every additional system you maintain requires attention. Every additional rule requires monitoring. Every additional goal requires energy. Attention is, we've talked about it before, metabolically expensive. When cognitive load rises, the brain shifts towards automatic patterns. It defaults to habit because habit conserves energy, which means the more layers we stack in the name of improvement, the more likely we are to feel overwhelmed and revert to that default automatic behavior that we might be trying to change. Subtraction reduces load, and reduced load increases capacity. Sometimes the smartest move isn't building more scaffolding, it's actually removing weight. I want you to think about it this way. There's something deeply regulating about simplicity. When competing cues are removed from your environment, the brain processes fewer reward signals. When there are fewer options, decision fatigue decreases. When there is less noise, the nervous system settles. Think about walking into a cluttered room versus a simple, clean one. Your brain processes every object as information. Clutter isn't just visual, it's cognitive. And the same is true for commitments and notifications and unfinished decisions and open loops. Subtraction reduces signal competition. And when signal competition decreases, clarity increases. Sometimes what needs to be removed isn't a task or an app. It's a belief, a narrative about who you are, what you believe about yourself. The brain prefers stable identity because predictability feels safe. So when you begin questioning a long-held belief about yourself, the resistance can feel stronger than you expect. But identity isn't erased through subtraction. It's refined. You're not removing yourself. You're removing something that no longer aligns. And refinement is just simply not a loss. It's evolution. Let's talk about dopamine for a minute. We know we love talking about dopamine here on Think Thursdays. We are surrounded by highly concentrated, low-effort rewards, constant scrolling, streaming, notifications, rapid-fire information. When your brain adapts to high stimulation, your baseline shifts. Ordinary experiences can start to feel dull by comparison. Subtracting stimulation can initially feel uncomfortable because you dip below that adapted baseline. But over time, reducing input recalibrates sensitivity. Focus improves, patience increases, everyday moments regain some meaning. In other words, subtraction can actually restore your reward balance. So it's another really effective strategy in terms of recalibrating and improving dopamine and that dopaminergic system. But only if you tolerate, right, the short-term discomfort. And that's why I talk about often saying that we have to allow the discomfort to be there, and especially discomfort that comes with urges, right? Here's an experiment that I want you to try this week. Instead of asking, how can I add something to improve this? Try asking, what is creating friction? What is adding noise? What feels heavy? What is competing for my attention? And let's remove one thing. Not dramatically, not impulsively, something just thoughtfully that feels like would make things better and easier and less cluttered in our brains. Because subtraction compounds. And once you do it once, you might find that you can do more subtraction. Behavior change isn't always about stacking new habits. Sometimes it's about clearing space so that habits you already value can breathe. The brain functions best when there is clarity and margin, not when it's juggling dozens of improvement strategies at once. Less input can mean better output. It can mean greater consistency, and less noise in the brain can mean better focus. And that isn't minimalism as some sort of cosmetic Band-Aid. That's neurological efficiency. Your brain is biased toward addition. So let's start using that knowledge that's the way the brain is built to start recognizing opportunities to do something different. Experiment with subtraction, not as deprivation, but as design. Not as a loss. We need to shift that and reframe that and look at it as an improvement. Because sometimes progress doesn't look like more. It looks like less. And that can be the smartest move of all. All right, that's all I have for you this week, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.